It seems rather strange to be recording a Punctibyte from the comfort of the office instead of at home, but it worked out since it's spring break. And speaking of spring break, I hope you all are enjoying a great break. And I want to say thank you to all of you who helped me out last week, really keeping the boat floating when I was gone at Nationals. We had an incredibly successful showing with the women gaining the overall title and the men the runner-up. So you all made that very possible by allowing me to be gone. And speaking of making things possible, this week you're going to be helping me out with labs 18 and 19 for most of you, though Aaron and Aaron will go on to lab 20. John and Bailey will be there for Open Lab to help out with that session. And of course, as always, feel free to come if you're not already signed up for Open Lab. We always love to have you. And you guys have done such a phenomenal job of support for that session throughout. Remember that we do have our skills rubrics need to be submitted by either Monday or Tuesday of this week. So those are done, and we can get grades entered and ready to go for those assessments. We're going to work into Lab 18 and Lab 19, and I want to go through some of the TA guideline things for that. I also did want to remind you all that this week, the 24th through the 28th, really is technically advising week. So if you haven't already scheduled an appointment with me, for many of you as your advisor or with your advisor, that's something to keep on your mind. Let's jump into the TA guidelines, but not before I give you a quick maybe tidbit on why chocolate is so dang good for us. So dark chocolate contains a lot of antioxidants, and we already knew that, but what is also being recognized and reported on here on NPR, a summary of some of the studies that have been done showing that dark chocolate can also enhance the healthful microbiome bacteria in your gut and can very much contribute to the release of anti-inflammatory compounds. So if you haven't already looked at this article, I did just tweet it on my Twitter account, so you should definitely check it out. But not before listening to the rest of this Punctibyte. We're going to talk a little bit about Lab 18 and what's up and coming for Lab 18. Primarily, this lab will be dedicated to inoculating the reserve and working stocks. So assuming that students got good growth on their plates from last time, they'll take a single isolated colony from which they will inoculate both a reserve and a working stock, and they'll do a gram stain on that. If students don't have good isolated colonies, then what we'll have to do is to utilize other students' plates, allow them to maybe re-inoculate another plate that way, or to utilize a colony from that, because it's been too long to go back to those original broth cultures that we had. So that will be our primary goal during Lab 18, but also please do remember that this is the wine lab as well. If you're going to be giving that wine lecture, please spend time booning up on your wine knowledge so that you can give a really good lecture on fermentation and really help the students understand some of the concepts there, but also some of the larger applications of such an incredible industrial process. So remember too that beginning in Lab 19, students are going to be recording data at the end of Lab 18 in those data tables. Please, please make sure that you get to each and every single student and individually speak to them about the importance of the process of first recording in their own words into their lab manual, followed by then summarizing in typed format those tables that were originally written in their own words. If we don't do this, we end up with cases of plagiarism where students copy and paste from the summary of biochemical tests into their tables. And that's really not the process that we want to teach. We want to teach the detailed observation from the lab and summary from the lab in the lab notebook, followed by taking that and putting into succinct and typewritten form in their final report. The other thing we need to remind the students of during Lab 18 is that for Lab 19, they need to bring with them a sturdy plastic cup. This cup needs to be something that will stand up on its own and will fit their tubes in it. So you can show them the types of cups that we're looking for. They're the 7-Eleven type cups that have a little bit of a sturdiness to them. So that'll be needed in Lab 19. And in Lab 19, we will be inoculating, as per the checklist in that lab, all of the biochemical tests that are needed to get started on the identification. Um, this checklist is more important for students who didn't do a good job on their unknown ID plan. If they did a really good job on planning the ID, they almost don't need to use those checklists at all. And in fact, I would encourage them to follow up on their own plan that they had for identification. We're starting to allow them to understand what it would be like to design your own experiment. And that's something that I think is fun to follow up on for those students who did a good job with that. It's also on Lab 19 that the ID plan and the hypotheses and references are due. So we'll want to make sure to collect those and be ready to grade those. Remember that there was a rubric that we handed out to the students. They need to resubmit that rubric with their ID plan so that you have that to serve as your grading key for the ID plan. There is a lowdown on grading the hypotheses and references in their lab manual, and they can also submit that as well. Finally, during Lab 19, we would like to set aside the MRVP tubes. We would also like to hold on to the NSM plates. So if we can put those in a slightly different place, that would be really, really helpful. I think there was some confusion on lid colors for the MRVP tubes. If that is the case, we're going to need to take special care that we know which of those tubes are the MRVPs and get those into a special rack. I think that primarily summarizes Lab 19 and all that's going on in that lab. Only Erin and Aaron will go on to Lab 20, but this is continued checking off tests that need to be done for the unknown. We need to make sure that when we have the camp station set up that there is a PenSen Staph aureus in place at that station. And for the rapid KOH test, we also need to make sure that there's dilute KOH, not the 40% KOH that's used for the MRVP test, but the dilute KOH that is there. And you may want to take time to label the KOH station, making sure that students know that that is just a backup method for determining the gram reaction. It doesn't tell us purity, so it's not as good as the gram stain in that way, but sometimes it's a nice secondary way to determine gram reaction because, as you know, sometimes decolorization is an issue in gram staining. Okay, that is primarily what we have on the up and up for the upcoming labs. I hope that that serves as a guide for all of you as we go into these labs. We do need to keep an eye individually on each student to make sure that they're understanding the process that they're using to identify their unknowns. And we also need to make sure that everybody's got an isolated colony from that first day because I know there were some problems with growth in some of the broths. So if we need to utilize other isolated colonies from other students' plates, that may be something that we have to do this time. It may be the better part of valor because our tubes are so old that we won't be able to re-inoculate from those. Okay, great. I think that is everything that I wanted to make sure to mention to you today. And again, I thank you so much for holding down the fort while I was gone and for your continued hard work. I promise that as soon as we get through the terror of advising, I will schedule a TA dinner and we'll have a little bit of fun. So see you soon.